know I washed myself real quick, I would have got the extra. This is truly the name. It's perfect for this. God is perfect name. Whoever. 300.
This is every single hand from a 2-5 session at Grand Villa, and let's just jump right into it. This hand, I pick up pocket nines in the low jack position. I open to $15 and get called by the cutoff position. The flop comes 3 overcards, and I just check fold. This hand, I pick up king queen of spades at the cutoff. Everyone folds to me, and I open to $15. Only the big blind calls. The flop is queen 9-7 rainbow with 1 spade. Big blind checks, and I c-bet for $25. The villain folds, and I take it down. This hand, I have pocket sixes. I call and open for $15, and basically miss the flop and give up. This hand, I pick up pocket nines at under the gun +1. I open to $15 and both blinds call. It's 3-way into a flop of ace-ace-8 rainbow. Both players check to me and I c-bet for $15. The big blind calls, and the turn is another 8, double pairing the board. The villain checks and I check back. The river is a 7, which is a brick. The villain leads out for $40. I just don't think there are any bluffs in this spot, so I fold. This hand, I have king 9 of diamonds at under the gun +1. I have to set the stage for this hand. I am at a feeder table and it's short-handed with only 6 players, so the ranges are a bit wider. I open to $15. The cutoff and the button calls. It's a 3-way into a flop of deuce 5-9 rainbow. I c-bet for $20 and the cutoff raises to $65. The button calls. The cutoff player is someone that I've played with before and has the tendency to make this move. When he doesn't believe the preflop aggressor, he would raise the c-bet with any pair on the flop. I think the button knows this as well, so when the action gets back to me, my top pair with strong kicker is actually something I'm very comfortable with and feel that I'm in the lead most of the time here. And I'll probably get value from hands like 9-8 suited, 9-10 suited, 9-jack suited. I call. The turn is the queen of clubs. I check. The cutoff bets $155. The button folds. For now, I don't feel like the queen changed much, aside from bringing in the backdoor flush draw. When he bets that sizing, I feel like he could have picked up more equity with 9x of clubs, or simply going for value protection against the flush draw and or 2 high cards that can suck out. So I'm thinking I'm still in the lead, and he's not expecting me to have a 9 here that outkicks him. I still want to take my hand to showdown. I call. The river is an offsuit 5. I check. The villain bets $200. I think for a while. Not a great spot, as I was hoping for a check back. It definitely looks like this bet is for value. I do beat a lot of 9x hands, and I've seen this villain go for thin value before. My hand also unblocks the clubs and straight draws, so there's a slight chance he is turning a busted flush draw into a bluff, or just happens to have 9x of clubs thinking he's good most of the time. In this short-handed configuration, I feel like my hand is pretty strong, and the bluffing frequencies are slightly increased, so with all those factors in play, I flick in the call. The villain shows me the bad news with Queen 9. That is well played by the villain, and I lose this one. This hand, I am at the cutoff with 10 jack of clubs. I open to $15. The button 3 bets to $75. The blinds fold and I call. The flop comes 8-9-3, all clubs. Pretty good flop for me as I hit a flush with an open-ended straight flush draw. I check to the pre-flop aggressor. The villain C bets for $85. Out of position with a made hand, I decide that check raising here is the best play. My value is mostly going to come from a high card club. So if the villain has something like ace king with a club or overpair with a club, I want to start getting my value now, denying him the chance to pot control or realize his equity. If anything, I want to get everything in when I'm likely the favorite. If I get coolered by a higher flush, then so be it. As played though, I'm sticking with putting the villain on the ranges of ace king or overpair, and hopefully he has a club in his hand to call off when I'm ahead. I raise it to $250. The villain tanks for a while and then calls. The turn is a 9. Even though this card pairs the board, it's essentially a brick. I'm just not putting the villain on 2 pair or a set on the flop that could have boated up. Based on the history I have with him, I actually think this makes for a good scare card that I can bluff with. I mean, from the villain's perspective. So shoving now might actually induce him to bluff catch. I do just that and go all in. The villain's stack, I believe, is around $900. He tanks for a pretty long time and then folds. This hand, I pick up pocket eights and I open to $15. I get 3 bet to $55 and I call to set mine. I end up missing the flop and just check fold. This hand, I have 8-7 of hearts and I open to $15 in late position. Everyone folds and I just steal the blinds. This hand, I have Queen Jack in the middle position. I open to $15 and get called by the hijack position. Everyone else folds. It's heads up into a flop of Ace, Jack, Deuce, Rainbow. I check this one and the villain bets $30. I call with second pair. The turn is a brick. I check and the villain checks back. The river is another brick. Now I basically only lose to an ace. Since the villain checked back the turn, I think I'm in the lead here with second pair and good kicker. I decide to go for thin value, targeting a Jack X hand, like Jack 10 or Jack 9. Based on how the turn played out, I think neither of us will expect anyone to have an ace here. I bet $30. The villain calls. I table my hand and he says I'm good. This hand, I am in the low jack position with Queen 10. I open to $20. The hijack, the cutoff, and the big blind calls. The flop comes Queen 9 deuce with 2 spades. The big blind checks, and I c-bet for $30. Even though I have top pair, my kicker is not great. With this board texture in a multi-way pot, I'm just hoping to take it down on this street. If I get resistance or played back at, it will be quite hard for me to continue. The hijack calls, the cutoff calls, the big blind folds. The turn is an offsuit jack. I do pick up an open-ender to go with my top pair, but out of position multi-way, I decide to check. The hijack bets out $105. The cutoff thinks for a while, and then raises to $350. With this action, I don't think my hand is ever good here, so I decide to let it go. It is later revealed that one of the villains hit the nut straight with a combo draw. This hand, I pick up 5-7 of diamonds at the cutoff. There's one limper, and I decide to isolate by raising to $20. And only the limper calls. The flop comes ace high, and I don't hit anything, but when it checks to me, the board is good for my range, so I c-bet for $25. And fortunately, the villain check raises me to $85, and I just let it go. This hand, I pick up ace-jack in the middle position. I open to $15 and the low jack calls. It's heads up into a flop of ace, ace, ace. I flop quad aces, which of course is pretty great, but on the other hand, I highly doubt I can get much value here. I check. The villain checks back. The turn is a 7. I check again. The villain checks back. The river is a queen. Now I bet $15, hoping the villain caught something. Unfortunately, he folds, and I take down a tiny pot with a huge hand. This hand, I pick up king-jack at the cutoff. I open to $15 and I steal the blinds. This hand, I pick up pocket nines in the big blind. The button opens to $15. The small blind calls. I 3-bet squeeze to $75, mainly to take it down now against the button open. The button calls, and the small blind folds. The flop comes 3 low cards. I c-bet for $60. The villain folds, and I take it down. This hand, I pick up 3-4 suited at the hijack position. I open to $15 and I steal the blinds here. As I'm folding a bunch of hands here, I just want to say thank you to everyone watching my videos. For those of you who have not subscribed, which according to my stats is a lot of you, please subscribe. It really does help the channel a lot. Thank you. This hand, I pick up ace-jack on the button. Everyone folds to me and I open to $15. Only the big blind calls. It's heads up into a flop of king, jack, deuce, rainbow. The villain checks and I c-bet for $15. He calls. The turn is a 6. The villain checks again. The board is pretty dry, so I'm not sure if he is trapping me with a king or on a straight draw. I decide to check back and evaluate. The river is another king. The villain checks once again, so now I'm quite sure he doesn't have the king. I decide to go for a bet that looks like a bluff to target a pocket pair or a weaker jack to bluff catch. I bet $50. The villain snap folds. This hand, I pick up ace-king in the middle position. I open to $15. The low jack calls. The button 3-bet squeezes to $75. The blinds fold and the action is back on me. I call. The low jack folds. The flop comes 9-3-5 rainbow. I check. The button checks back. The turn is the 10 of diamonds, bringing in the diamond flush draw. I feel that this board is better for my range now. Since the villain checked back the flop, I think I can take a stab here, as it still makes sense that I could have been trapping on the flop. I'm also keeping in mind that I have the king of diamonds, which I can use to rep a flush if a diamond hits and I need to go the route of a big river bluff. I bet $75, hoping to take it down now. The villain calls. At this moment, I know my hand can't be good. I'm probably up against jacks or queens, so I'm rooting for an ace or king on the river to win a showdown, or a good card to bluff with. The river comes the 4 of diamonds, which completes the backdoor flush. This is what I'd like to call hitting a bluffing out. I review my story to see if it makes sense. This is what I want the villain to perceive. I check the flop, the turn gives me a flush draw, so I lead out and get called. The river completes the flush, so now I bet big. I decide to go for it. Also, with some history with this villain, knowing he is capable of making big folds. I bet $300. The villain tanks for a while and folds, and I get this one through. This hand, I pick up a nice looking King Queen of Spades. I open to $15 and there are 2 callers. I completely miss the board and end up check folding. This hand, I pick up Queen Jack at the cutoff. I open to $15, everyone folds, and I take the blinds. This hand, I pick up pocket 10s at under the gun +1. I open to $15, only the middle position and hijack calls. So I am out of position and it's 3-way to a flop of Ace-10-3 with 2 hearts. Great flop for me. I finally hit a set this session, and it's middle set with an ace-high board and some draws, multi-way. An awesome spot for value. I lead out for $30. Both players call. At this point, I'm putting one of the villains on an ace and the other on the flush draw. The turn is the Queen of Diamonds. I am eyeing the middle position stack. I think I'm still ahead right now, and I want to charge the maximum value for all draws. I don't expect anyone to have ace-king here without a 3-bet preflop, but ace-jack picks up extra equity for the straight draw. Ace-queen hits hard and will probably raise. Any ace-x of diamonds is not going anywhere, and maybe even queen-x of hearts is committed. I'm hoping the middle position has one of these hands and would get a stack in. I bet $150. The middle position thinks for a while and then announces all in. The hijack folds, and I snap call as this is exactly what I wanted. The river is a brick. We table our hands, and I get shown the bad news. The villain has King Jack for a straight. I say nice hand, and I think it was pretty funny because this villain kept apologizing to me. He kept saying sorry to me during the subsequent hands, and I was the one to console him, telling him he played good and don't be sorry. Interesting guy. This hand, I pick up 4-7 of diamonds at the hijack position. There's one limper in the middle position. He technically wasn't really a limper. He had missed his blind from a previous round and just posted $5. He checks his option. I open to $15. The button calls and the limper calls. It's 3-way into a flop of 3-5-9 with 2 clubs. Everyone checks. The turn is the 4 of hearts. The middle position now leads out for $45. I start thinking here. The player behind me checked the flop when he was last to act, so I don't think he hit anything, and the 4 certainly didn't help him. So he will likely be gone this street. My pair 4 is probably not ahead right now, so I am mostly viewing it as a set blocker, if anything. I do have a 7, which blocks the nut straight. My hand also unblocks both flush draws on the board now, so I decide to go for an aggressive move by raising it to $150. I figure that I have to raise strong now if I want to rep a set or straight. I'm putting the villain on a 9 that tried to trap the flop, in which case I should be able to take down the pawn now against one pair. If he calls, then it's possible he might have one of the flush draws, And if both of those draws miss, I can likely take down the pot on the river. The button folds as expected, and the middle position calls. The river is an offsuit ace. The villain checks. I'm going to follow through with my plan for a river bluff, but I'm just thinking of the right sizing. On one hand, the ace could be a good scare card, and I imagine I don't need to bet too big to fold off a 9. But if the villain happens to have a nut flush draw with one of the flush draws on board and hit the ace on the river, I might screw myself over by betting too small. I decide to continue the story of me having a super strong hand on the turn, like a set or straight. I announce $350, and before I put the chips in, the villain already folds. This hand, I pick up ace-5 of diamonds on the button. There are 2 limpers, and the hijack raises to $30. I decide to cold call with a suited ace on the button. The small blind calls, and one of the limpers call. I'm in position, and it's 4-way to a flop of ace-queen-10 rainbow. Everyone checks to me. Although I have top pair, my kicker is really weak and likely won't even play by the end. This is a pretty dangerous board that could have hit any of us really hard, so I decide to check back for pot control and assess the action. The turn is an 8. The small blind and middle position checks again, and the hijack, who was the pre-flop aggressor, bets $90. Since the other 2 villains checked twice now, I put them on nothing and will likely be out of here this street. The hijack betting here is a bit strange because the 8 can't have helped him unless he's repping to have raised pre-flop big with Jack 9, which doesn't make too much sense for now. I under-repped my hand by checking the flop, so I call with top pair. As expected, everyone else folds. The river is another queen. The villain checks. With this board, I don't see any thin value to go for. I can't see the villain calling a bet with just a 10. He might call a small bet with jacks or kings, but I think that's just too thin. I happily check this one down. The villain shows king 9 of diamonds, and I take this pot down. If only the board came diamonds, this would have been a cooler hand in my favor. This is where I decide to go for a coffee break. One of the great things about the Grand Villa Poker Room is Starbucks being right across from it. I pick up my favorite drink, the Apple Crisp Oat Macchiato. I don't understand why they don't offer this drink all year long. If they did, they would probably suck me in to buy one every day. This hand, I pick up ace-10 of spades in the middle position. I open to $15. There's one caller, and then the cutoff, 3-bet squeezes to $75. When the action gets back to me, I just let this one go. This hand, I pick up 9-10 on the button. Under the gun opens to $15. The cutoff calls, and I decide to cold call with a very mediocre hand, but in position. It's 3-way to a flop of 10-9-3 rainbow, and I get instantly rewarded with top 2 pair. Under the gun checks, and then the cutoff bets $30. I call. Under the gun folds. The turn is a deuce. The villain now checks. I bet $80 to charge for all straight draws, but I think the villain most likely has a 10 here to be able to lead out on the flop with a relatively dry board. He calls. The river is another deuce. The villain checks again. This is a great card because having a 10 is just too strong for most people to fold now, if I can size the bet right. No one is going to have a deuce in this spot. I decide to go for a value bet that targets a strong 10, like ace-10 or king-10. I bet $180. The villain thinks for a while and calls. I table my hand and he mucks. This hand, I have ace-4 of diamonds, and I open to $15. There's one caller, and I'm in position, and it's heads up. The flop, I completely miss, but I just take down the pot with a c-bet of $10. This hand, I have king-8 of diamonds at the cutoff. I open to $15 and get one caller. I completely missed the flop, but I just take it down with a c-bet. For the last hand of this session, I pick up 10-8 offsuit, and it's a fold. Here are the results of this session. I bought in for $2,440 and I cashed out for $1,967. So that is a loss of $473. And now for some stats from this session. And just like a previous video where I did every single hand plus stats, not sure how much you can take away from these numbers, but here we go. The total number of hands dealt was 156, and that's an average of 35 hands per hour. The number of hands I folded pre-flop was 116, so I played 39 hands, and that's a VPIP of 25%. The number of pots won was 17, and I lost 22 pots. And of those 39 hands played, the number of times that we went to showdown was 6. The number of times I got dealt pocket pairs was 7. And of those 7, I flopped a set once. And that one time was the biggest pot that I lost this session. And that is it for this episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope you guys look forward to the next.